Hey guys, tonight we wander into the hills of Appalachia, where the air is damp with pine and the fireflies switch on like a string of lazy fairy lights. You follow a dirt path, crunching twigs underfoot, the whole forest tilting toward night. The horizon still glows, faint orange, but shadows stretch long and heavy. And you're already thinking, if a bear shows up, you probably won't survive this. But hey, at least your obituary will say you were exploring a mysterious wishing well, so that's something. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the time where you are right now. I always find it fascinating how many of you are scattered across the globe, listening in bed, on buses, or even sneaking this during work breaks. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The path before you dips into a hollow, lined with oak and sycamore that have stood longer than any of the broken cabins scattered nearby. Crow cuts across the last streak of daylight, its call ricocheting through the trees. Down the slope, a meadow opens up, grass swaying in waves. And there, in the clearing's belly rest, a circle of stones stacked higher than your chest. This is the well people around here whisper about, the one they say listens closer than it should. The stones are slick with moss, dark green, that glows when the moonlight strikes it right. You brush your fingers across one rock, feeling the cold moisture cling. Someone once said Appalachian stone holds memory like a tape recorder pressed against the mountain's chest. If that's true, this well must be bursting with secrets. A crumbling wooden frame hugs the top, and a chain dangles with a crooked iron handle, squeaking whenever the wind nudges it. The forest air feels charged here still, but not silent. A frog chirps in the distance, cicadas drone, and every so often the grass rustles like someone else is moving, just out of sight. Historians note that wells like this, scattered through Appalachia, often served not just as water sources, but as community anchors. They were where neighbors caught up on gossip, traded remedies, and sometimes hatched plans best left out of barns. Yet, alongside those practical uses grew layers of folklore. Some claim the stonework style hints at Scots-Irish settlers who carried old country tales of wishing wells. Others insist Cherokee tribes had sacred springs nearby long before settlers arrived. Historians still argue whether this particular well stands on a native ritual site or was carved later with European hands. French tidbits bloom around it too. Locals once swore the well hummed louder right before a thunderstorm, like it had its own barometer. Some even claimed you could drop a pebble and hear not just a splash, but faint music, like a dulcimer being plucked underground. You consider testing it, Kata, but the night has stretched deep enough that every sound feels amplified to your heartbeat, the creak of your boots, even the whistle of your breath. Kid, joke springs up in your head. You could live stream this, call it well ASMR, and get 1 million subscribers. Then again, standing here, you doubt cell service even exists. Appalachian dead zones don't care about your Wi-Fi cravings. The air cools fast, sharper than the town you left behind an hour ago. You pull your jacket tighter, toes crunching damp soil, and step closer. Fireflies scatter upward as if you've broken some invisible perimeter. You half expect to see a sign. Warning, enter at your own risk. Wishes may be binding. Your reflection barely shows in the shadowy mouth of the well, just faint outlines, shifting as clouds drag past the moon. You remember hearing that miners once drank from this water on their way to shifts deep underground. Some believed, if you wished, before descending, you'd come back alive. Coal mining in Appalachia was brutal collapses, black lung, explosions, and maybe tossing a coin here felt like insurance. You imagine those men, grime already in their lungs, whispering their hopes to the same stones your hand rests on now. Another detail you can T-shake. There are stories of people swearing the well. S-water tasted different depending on your mood. Sweet if you were hopeful, bitter if you carried dread. Scientists would likely blame minerals or bacteria, but the thought clings, unsettling and weirdly comforting at once. You lean closer, staring into the void, waiting for your eyes to adjust. The blackness feels endless, swallowing the faint glimmer of moonlight. A drop falls somewhere far below, echoing upward in lazy rings. That sound alone might rock you to sleep if you stayed long enough. The first section of your night journey ends not with a conclusion, but a pause. You're here, in front of the well, the Appalachian dark pressing close, the air full of memory and mystery. Whatever this place's legend, survival tool, or leftover architecture from a vanished time, it feels alive. And for now, you just stand still, letting the silence stretch like a blanket over your thoughts. The night thickens, and your eyes finally adjust enough to really take in the shape of the well. It isn't just a circle of stones plunked together like some lazy camp project. Each rock looks hand-chosen, edges smooth, as if by river current, and stacked with more care than you'd expect in a forest clearing. You notice small scratches carved into the stone's line spirals, even what looks like a crude cross. Some marks might be natural, sure, but others, someone put them there on purpose. You tilt your head and imagine bored kids scratching initials, or maybe miners carving prayers before shifts underground. The wooden frame above the well groans every time the wind brushes it. You can picture the locals standing around here, back when this hollow was still stitched with cabins, each person leaning against the stones, waiting their turn with a bucket. You remember hearing a story that Appalachian communities sometimes used wells as places of confession. Not church confession, more like, if you whispered your troubles into the mouth, you could walk away lighter. That's comforting in theory, but a little creepy in practice. Of course, no Appalachian story is complete without a twist of the supernatural. Folks around here say the well grants wishes, but never quite in the way you expect. You want wealth? The mine pays you double, but collapses before you can spend a dime. You wish for love. Someone shows up, but they're gone before spring. The lore feels like one of those monkey's paw cautionary tales, filtered through southern draws and passed along over sweet tea. And yet, people kept wishing. Historians point out that rural communities often clung to charms and folk rituals because survival meant grasping at any kind of hope. Imagine winters before electricity, coal, stove, sputtering, fields frozen solid, everything dark by 5 p.m. A well that might just listen to your deepest longing would have been irresistible. There's a fringe tidbit too that makes you smirk. Some locals once swore the well could tell time. Drop a stone in at exactly midnight, they said, and you'd hear not one splash but 12 faint echoes, like a ghostly clock striking underground. No one's produced audio proof, of course, but you have considered whipping out your phone, recording the drop, and uploading Haunted Appalachian Clock Well for clicks. The title alone would rake in the conspiracy crowd. Still, there's no mistaking how heavy the air feels around the stones. It's not just the humidity, it's the weight of all those whispered words piled up over centuries. You imagine a grandmother kneeling here during the Great Depression, asking the well to keep her kids fed through winter. You imagine a Civil War deserter, trembling hands tossing in a button instead of a coin, begging to make it home unseen. Each wish leaves residue, like chalk dust on dark cloth. You laugh quietly at yourself, shaking your head. City logic tells you it's just a pit lined with rocks, but your skin prickles anyway, like the well has noticed you standing there too long. The bucket chain rattles suddenly, though you swear no wind moved it. The squeak is sharp, metal grinding on metal, echoing too loudly in the night. You step back instinctively, shoes squelching in damp earth, pulse thumping in your ears. The clearing holds its breath, cicadas pause. Even the frog that had been croaking goes quiet. It's just you, the stones, and that yawning darkness below. You swallow, trying to ease the tension by cracking a joke in your head. If Netflix needs a horror opening scene, congratulations, you've just nailed it. But nothing lunges out. No ghost climbs the stones. just stillness returning, slow and thick. The frogs start up again. The cicadas pick their endless chorus back up, and you feel a little foolish. Still, you can't shake the thought that maybe the well shifted on its own. Historians still argue whether stories like these are imported European folklore or homegrown Appalachian invention. Some say settlers brought tales of sacred springs and translated them into their new world. Others insist the land itself demanded new myths shaped by the mountains, isolation, and struggle. Standing here now, you get why no one can agree. It feels both ancient and recent, foreign and familiar, like a crossroads of cultures. You crouch low, palmed pressed flat to the stones. They're colder than the air, as if storing the mountains chill deep inside. You whisper a joke under your breath. Okay, well, grant me better Wi-Fi, and laugh at your own nervousness. The sound bounces back, softer than you expect, like someone chuckling politely along with you. And just like that, you're hooked. Whatever this place is, it's not ordinary. It pulls you in, demanding you listen longer, stay later. You shift your weight, settle onto the damp grass, and let the night fold around you, bracing for the stories the well might still want to tell. You sit back on your heels, still close to the well's rim, and let your memory unfurl the kinds of things you've heard from locals about this place. Appalachia has always been a story hoarder, the kind of region where tales stick like burrs on socks. And the wishing well. Oh, it's basically a celebrity in the folklore lineup. The most common version goes like this. You whisper your desire, drop in a token, and if the well accepts it, your wish comes true. If the token bounces oddly or disappears without a sound, you'd better start praying instead. Nobody ever agrees on what counts as accepted. Some swear they heard the splash even when the water was bone low in summer. Others said the well sometimes spit things back up overnight, tokens lying on the grass like rejected job applications. One older man in town, you recall, told a story about how his grandfather wished for rain during the Dust Bowl years. He tossed in a nickel, and by the next morning, storms had rolled across the ridge. Of course, the rain flooded his cornfield into mud soup, and the barn roof collapsed. Classic Appalachian twist. Yes, the well gives, but it gives with teeth. Historians remind us that Appalachian storytelling was survival training disguised as entertainment. Folktales taught kids to respect land, weather, and luck. The well, then, was less about magic than about teaching cautions. Ever ask for too much. Never assume the world bends to you. I'd still. People leaned in, whispering wishes into the stones, because what else could you do in a place where coal mines closed overnight and hospitals sat 2 counties away? Here's a fringe detail you can't shake. In the 1920s, some folks claimed the well answered not with water, but with voices. Thin, echoing, like a choir trapped underground. No one ever explained whether it was acoustics or imagination, but the story spread far enough that kids dared each other to lean in after dark and ask, "Who's down there?" Q swore they heard their own names spoken back. Creepy bedtime material, right? You laugh softly, though goosebumps still crawl up your arms. The chain above clinks again, just once, almost like punctuation to the thought. You mutter a sarcastic, "Thanks for the ambience," half expecting no reply. But the silence that follows is so complete, you feel like the well just smirked. And of course, people in town still debate. Historians still argue whether these stories are simple, recycled ghost tales from Europe, or whether they grew from deeper Cherokee Spring lore, twisted in translation over centuries. Some say both groups told stories of places where water carried wishes, and Appalachia's isolation let the threads braid together. The way it stuck. You sit cross-legged now, damp grass soaking through your jeans, and watch the moon snag itself on passing clouds. Around you, crickets swell their chorus, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifts down from some unseen cabin up the ridge. Maybe somebody else is awake, sipping sweet tea telling the very same story of the wishing well. The idea makes you grin. Appalachia has never needed TikTok trends. Its legends have been looping for hundreds of years. You're just another listener, folded into the long echo. The well watches, the forest hums, and your heartbeat syncs with the deep rhythm of the hollow. You lean back on your palms, eyes drifting past the stone rim and toward the dark silhouette of the hills beyond. Appalachia has a way of reminding you that history here isn't polished museum glass. It's cracked, rusted, and still echoing through the valleys. The wishing well doesn't stand alone. Just over the ridge are scars left by coal shafts, some caved in long ago, others sealed with rusted gates that groan in the wind. You swear you can smell the faint tang of coal dust even now, though it's probably just damp earth in your imagination running overtime. Coal towns rose fast in these mountains during the 19th and 20th centuries. Families built entire lives around a single mine, each paycheck tied to how deep men dug beneath the rock. Wells like this one were lifelines, sometimes the only clean water for miles when streams were fouled with runoff. People prayed over the buckets as they came up, hoping the water hadn't turned sour. You imagine a miner wiping sweat with soot-streaked hands, gulping down a dipperful, then heading underground with only a lantern and stubborn grit. The quirky side of that history. Towns claimed their wells had coal spirits living in them, guardian figures that kept men safe below. To keep them happy, miners' wives dropped in biscuits, cornbread, or even a splash of moonshine. The idea that you'd pour your hard-earned whiskey into a hole in the ground sounds ridiculous, but desperate times make strange bargains. Historians still argue whether these coal spirit stories were meant to reassure kids, or if adults actually believed them. Maybe both. When your livelihood depends on crawling into black tunnels that might collapse, you cling to whatever ritual makes the fear bearable. You glance back into the dark well mouth and picture all those whispered offerings layering over one another like sediment. As you shift, your boot scrapes the ground, uncovering a chunk of black rock near the stones. You lift it, just ordinary shell, but it reminds you of the company's script tokens miners used. Paid not in real money, but in coins, only good at the company store. You smirk at the irony, dropping tokens into a wishing well while being trapped in a system where even your wages were circular. Well, might have been kinder than the company owner. Come to think of it. A breeze rustles through the meadow, and you catch the faint creak of something metallically, maybe an abandoned elevator shaft, maybe just your nerves. You half expect the ground to tremble, like the mountain, remembering all the dynamite blasts packed into its ribs. You mutter to yourself, cool, free horror movie set again, trying to shake off the tension. And then the strangest thought hits. Maybe the well itself is a leftover marker, the last upright monument of a vanished coal camp. Towns came and went so quickly here that entire streets could vanish in a decade, swallowed by forest regrowth. The well stays because water always matters. Some fringe writers even claim these wells mark PowerPoints in the landscape, where human industry accidentally overlapped with natural energy veins. Sounds like New Age babble, but it sticks in your head. The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest on Earth, weathered, ancient, full of layers no one fully understands. Maybe the people who built this well felt that hum under their boots and dug exactly where it thrummed loudest. You sigh, leaning closer again, letting the cool stone press against your arm. The air around you feels denser, as though you've been folded into a hidden pocket of time. The cicadas drone, the frogs keep time, and for a moment you imagine the miners' lanterns flickering just past the tree line, swinging as if men are still walking home from the shaft, boots heavy, shoulders bent. You blink, and the meadow is empty against just you, the well, and a history that refuses to stay buried. You stretch your legs, letting your boots sink deeper into the damp grass. The well is quiet for now, just a black circle in the earth. Your thoughts wander toward the people who lived in these hills long before you ever set foot here. It's the ones who treated everyday survival like a puzzle you never finished solving. Appalachia has always been equal parts grit and superstition, and nowhere does that show more than in a strange mashup of folk remedies and charms. You picture a woman in a calico dress, hair tied back, kneeling by this same well with a bundle of dried herbs in her hand. Feverfew for headaches, willow bark for pain, sassafras tea for whatever the doctor couldn't reach. Herbal cures weren't tea, just quaint. They were life support in valleys where professional medicine was days away on horseback. Families passed recipes down like treasure, storing jars of roots and dried leaves beside the flour. And then, because people can't help themselves, the practical remedies blurred into the magical ones. Bottle trees, those glass bottles spiked on branches near homes, were said to catch wandering spirits before they slipped in through the door. A house without a bottle tree looked almost naked, like it had forgotten its umbrella before a storm. You imagine this clearing decades ago, tainted with cobalt and green bottles that clinked in the wind, rattling like faint laughter. Historians point out that much of Appalachian folk medicine came from a patchwork: Cherokee knowledge of native plants, Scots-Irish charms, African-American rootwork. The mountains acted like a giant blender, shaking cultures together until the recipes overlapped. That's why the same plant might heal a wound in one story and ward off curses in another. Scholars still argue whether the magic parts were just exaggerations of medicine, or if people truly believed in supernatural protection. Here's the quirky tidbit that sticks. Some families swore if you rubbed a potato on your wart, then buried it by a well, the wart would vanish. You glance at the ground around the stones and half expect to see a spud graveyard down there. Imagine archaeologists digging it up one day, puzzled by the Appalachian potato cult. The well, then, wasn't just about drinking water. It was woven into the survival fabric. Women washed their babies here, men cleaned wounds after work, and kids dared each other to peer into its depths. You imagine someone dropping in a sprig of mint or a charm scrawled on paper, hoping the water carried away fever or bad luck. The night around you feels thicker as you think it through. A soft hoot drifts from the ridge, an owl marking its territory. The sound blends with the idea of bottle trees clinking in the dark, an orchestra of protection humming over families that had so little else to rely on. You grin at the thought. If modern wellness influencers ever stumbled here, they'd have a field day. 10 Appalachian hacks for your gut health. Number 7 will shock you. Except here, nobody packaged remedies for clicks. They passed them by word of mouth, trusting that the mountain's memory was longer than theirs. Your fingers trace the mossy stone again, damp, cool, and strangely grounding, as if the well still holds those whispered remedies. You wonder what would happen if you tossed in a bottle of aspirin. Now would the well sigh in relief, like, finally, we've upgraded? The idea makes you chuckle under your breath, laughter bouncing gently off the stones, and then silence folds back in, thick and expectant. You lean closer to the dark water, wondering if it remembers the mint leaves, the potatoes, the charms, and if somewhere, deep in the stone throat of this mountain, those wishes are still swirling. The chain above the well clinks as you nudge it, the sound sharp against the backdrop of frogs and cicadas. The iron handle feels rough in your hand, edges pitted by decades of weather, but solid enough to hold. You give it a cautious turn, and the bucket begins its slow descent, squealing on a pulley like it hasn't been touched in years. The noise slices the night, makes you wince, and you mutter a quick apology to the forest, as if sound itself were an intrusion. The bucket drops, chain uncoiling with a rhythm that feels like a heartbeat. You watch the links vanish into the black mouth of the well, one after another, until you lose sight of them completely. The chain rattles, echoes, bouncing in waves off unseen stone walls. You hold your breath, waiting for the splash, and the wait stretches longer than it should. Your mind races. What if there is no water anymore? What if the well just falls forever? And then, plunk. A faint splash echoes upward, softer than expected, like a pebble falling into a lake rather than a bucket striking water. The sound lingers, repeating in hollow ripples until silence swallows it again. You let out a laugh, shaky and too loud. Well, at least physics still works, you whisper, though part of you isn't entirely convinced. Historians note that wells like this were feats of community engineering, sometimes sunk 40 or 50 feet down through unforgiving rock. People used hand tools, chiseling and hauling, stone by stone. It could take months, even years, to finish one. Entire towns depended on their success, since a failed well meant either hauling water from a stream miles away or abandoning the settlement altogether. Scholars still argue whether this specific well was purely practical or always carried a ceremonial edge. You've heard the fringe stories too, that sometimes the chain lowered itself when no one touched it, or that a bucket pulled up at midnight would be filled with salt water no matter how far the ocean really was. Kids dared each other to taste it, swearing the brine stung their tongues. No scientific explanation ever stuck, but the story clung like lichen. You imagine one of those miners, sweaty and bone-tired, lowering this same bucket. Maybe he mumbled a quick wish. "Let me come back tomorrow," before scooping a dipperful for his cracked lips. The bucket groans now, heavy with water, and you crank it back up, arm muscles burning. Droplets spatter on your wrist as the iron lip of the pail finally emerges, cold and dripping in the moonlight. You peer into it. The water looks darker than it should, reflecting the faint outline of your face and the stars above. You dip a finger in its icy, biting enough to make you gasp. You wipe it on your jeans, watching the droplet shimmer before it disappears. For a second, you almost feel like you've been noticed. The well gave you something, and now it's waiting for what you'll give back. A joke surfaces in your head to calm the nerves. Great, I'm in a relationship with a hole in the ground now. You shake your head, but you can't deny the intimacy of the exchange. The bucket squeaks as you let it rest, chain slackening like a sigh of relief. The night closes in again, steady and watchful. You glance at the tree line, half expecting someone or something to be standing there. But it's just shadows, just the hum of the mountains. You breathe deep, filling your lungs with the damp, earthy air. And still, that splash echoes in your mind, repeating like a memory that won't fade. The bucket waits, dripping steadily back into the well, as though reminding you, wishes are made down, not up. You let the bucket settle, droplets pattering back into the mouth of the well, and your thoughts drift to the people who gathered here after work when the air was thick with wood smoke and the stars blinked awake above the ridges. Appalachia has always been a land of fire, circles nights when stories stretched longer than shadows and jars of clear liquid passed from hand to hand. Moonshine, of course, that mountain-born elixir with more legends than recipes. The well shows up in plenty of those tales, like a character that never ages. Folks said you could water down shine with well water and it would taste smoother, cleaner. Others swore the opposite, that the well made the liquor burn hotter, a punishment for wasting good corn on something so dangerous. Either way, you can imagine a ring of faces lit by firelight, watching the bucket swing as they swapped stories. One story goes that a man tossed a shot of shine into the well, paying his tab to the spirits below. That night, his still didn't explode, though it had been hissing dangerously close for weeks. Coincidence? Maybe. But in Appalachia, coincidence and miracle were often just synonyms, wearing different hats. Historians remind us that moonshining wasn't just rebellion against the government tax, it was survival. When cash was scarce, liquor was currency. Families traded jars for medicine, tools, even school books. Wells like this one were meeting spots where neighbors checked each other's badges and whispered deals in the dark. Scholars still argue whether these gatherings were primarily about business or community bonding. Maybe both. Here is a quirky tidbit that makes you grin. Some moonshiners dropped boiled eggs into their shine jars to test purity. If the egg floated, the liquor was strong enough. If it sank, you'd wasted your corn. Imagine tossing an egg into this well just to see what message it might send back. Hard to picture anything but an Appalachian hen glaring at you from the bottom. You picture the laughter circling the stones, rough voices softened by liquor, cane, banjos strumming somewhere in the distance, boots tapping the dirt. The well sat at the center like a silent host, catching secrets as freely as it caught coins. Some people probably made wishes here they'd never dare say sober. The night feels thicker as you breathe in, as if smoke still lingers from those old fires. You chuckle at the thought of filming this haunted well moonshine tasting gone wrong at 3 a.m. You'd get clicks, sure, but the mountain would probably curse your liver for eternity. You run your hand along the damp stones again, hearing faint echoes of laughter that aren't really there. Maybe the well keeps a few jokes stored in its throat, waiting to be told again. You smile into the dark, strangely comforted by the thought that every sip, every wish, every story poured in here hasn't been lost. Teas, just steeping, like tea. You lean back against the damp stones, letting the cool seep through your shirt. The air is still heavy with the metallic tinks of the bucket, but your mind drifts further, sliding into the deeper grooves of history carved across these hills. Appalachia doesn't just carry coal dust and folklore, it carries scars from the Civil War, too, and the wishing well was no stranger to them. Picture it, ragged soldiers trudging up the same slope you just climbed, rifles slung, boots caked in mud. Armies crossed these mountains more than once, both Union and Confederate, leaving behind the usual debris of war-spent cartridges, broken buttons, even the occasional musket tossed aside when its owner didn't make it home. Wells like this became oases, places where men slumped in exhaustion, scooped water with trembling hands, and maybe, just maybe, muttered a prayer into the stones. One recorded account tells of Union scouts pausing at a mountain well in Western Virginia, close enough in geography that the story might well be about this very place. They drank deeply, then carved initials into the rim, leaving behind proof they'd lived one more day. Local kids later swore those carved letters glowed faintly by moonlight, like the stone itself remembered their fear. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some Civil War folklore insisted that water from a wishing well could tip a battle. The superstition went that if you whispered your regiment's name as you drank, fortune would follow you in the fight. Of course, fortune in those days often meant surviving long enough to limp home, not necessarily winning. Still, desperate men clung to desperate rituals. Historians still argue whether soldiers truly believed these wells held power, or if the stories grew after the war, retold by survivors who needed reasons for why they lived when others didn't. Maybe the well itself became a scapegoat for fatigue. You drank here and returned alive. You credited the stones. If you didn't, no one was left to contradict the legend. You lean over the rim again, imagining a soldier's reflection staring back at you hollow-eyed, jaw tight, a face barely older than a teenager. He whispers into the dark, drops in a button torn from his coat, and trudges away. Did he live? Did he vanish into the chaos of Shiloh or Gettysburg? The well doesn't say. It never does. Shiver runs down your spine, and you make a weak joke to break the tension. Great. Now I've got ghost infantry on speed dial. But the silence that follows feels too deep, too watchful, as though some echo of those men still lingers in the stones. The cicadas resume, filling the clearing with their endless hum. You sit back, the history pressing in around you like a quilt stitched from stories, some true, some bent, but all heavy. The wishing well doesn't care which is which. It just keeps listening. The stones feel rough beneath your fingertips as you trace their edges, and that's when you notice something odd. Nestled between the moss, half hidden by damp leaves, lie tiny shapes that don't belong. You brush aside the debris and find them, tokens left behind, forgotten offerings to the well. The first is a rusted coin, the surface worn so smooth you can't even tell what country it came from. You hold it up, moonlight glinting across the faintest outline of a face that might have once been a president, or maybe just your imagination filling in blanks. Tossed in by someone decades ago, hoping metal and water could bend reality. Beside it lies a ribbon, sun-bleached pink, its frayed ends curling like petals. You imagine a young girl knotting it in her hair before school, later untying it with a sigh and pushing it into the well. What did she wish for? A sweetheart's glance, a new pair of shoes, or something heavier like her father to come home from the mines? And then you see it, a locket, small and oval, its hinges rusted nearly shut. You pry it open carefully, heart thumping in the silence. Inside, the image is blurred beyond recognition. Water and time have smudged the face into a ghost. Maybe it was a soldier, maybe a child, maybe just someone who once mattered enough to carry in silver. You close it slowly, letting the weight settle in your palm. Historians note that wells across Appalachia often doubled as repositories for personal tokens. When there wasn't money to spare, people offered what they had: buttons, ribbons, beads, even carved wooden trinkets. It wasn't about the value of the item, but the intent. Scholars still argue whether these deposits were acts of superstition, memorial, or just habit passed along without question. There's a quirky tidbit too. In some counties, people swore the well rejected items it didn't want. Coins would reappear overnight on the rim. Ribbons would drift back up like the water spat them out. Kids dared each other to toss in bent nails, only to find them lying in the grass the next morning, cold with dew. You glance at the tokens in your hand and feel a shiver crawl your neck. These weren't spit out, they stayed. You set them gently on the stone ledge, not sure if you're trespassing or preserving. The night feels heavier now, like the air has thickened with memory. You mutter a weak joke, okay, antique store, but make it creepy. But your voice sounds too loud against the forest hush. You wonder how many more tokens lie hidden at the bottom, piled like sediment. Love notes, talismans, pieces of lives once lived. The well is less a wishing machine now, and more a time capsule, a memory vault the mountain refuses to unlock. You rest your hand over the locket one last time, then let it be. The well has kept it this long, doesn't need you to meddle. The clearing holds stillness like a held breath, but into that quiet drifts a softer sound, the faint rise and fall of music, from speakers, not from any car rolling down a distant road. It's the kind of melody that seems stitched into the air itself. You tilt your head and realize it's a tune you've heard before. Maybe in a history class, maybe on some dusty old record, an Appalachian ballad. Slow and mournful, words long forgotten, but the rhythm etched deep into the mountains. You hum along without meaning to, just a fragment, and the sound seems to blend with the chorus of insects. Banjo, fiddle, dulcimer, those were the instruments of choice up here, carried by settlers from Scotland and Ireland, reshaped into something uniquely Appalachian. Historians note how ballads acted like news broadcasts before radio. Stories of shipwrecks, murders, lost love, and hometown pride traveled ridge to ridge, carried on melodies easier to remember than plain words. Scholars still argue whether some of these songs were direct imports from the Old World, or if they were rewritten so many times that they became something entirely new. The quirky part. Some old-timers claimed the well itself sang on certain nights. They said if you leaned close and waited long enough, you'd hear the echo of ballads drifting up, like the stones remembered every verse ever sung nearby. Of course, skeptics point to acoustics. Wind rushing across the hollow, insects bouncing sound off water. Standing here, the idea doesn't feel impossible. You imagine a family gathering in this meadow a century ago, lantern light glowing, someone strumming a fiddle, voices rising together while kids twirled in the grass. The well, right there in the center, silent witness to joy as much as sorrow. Maybe someone sang directly to it, offering a verse as a kind of wish, not for riches, not for love, just for one more season of peace. Your own humming trails off, and the silence that follows feels like the forest leaning closer, waiting for more. You chuckle under your breath. Sorry guys. Hi Dan. T know the second verse, and the sound bounces back as though the well is laughing with you. For a moment, you swear you hear another voice, soft and distant, carrying the tale of the melody. Maybe it's just the wind. Or maybe the ballads here don't stop. They just find new throats to sing through. Even yours. The night presses on and the music fades, but the rhythm lingers in your chest, steady as your heartbeat. The well sits patient, as if it's waiting for the next verse. You let your eyes wander back to the circle of stone, tracing its uneven rim. Okay? Realize the biggest mystery, ice and tea, what was thrown inside, but where it came from in the first place. The wishing well doesn't come with a plaque or neat explanation. It just sits here, humming with contradictions, leaving you to wrestle with the question of origin. Some locals say settlers dug it, stacking the stones with bare hands, shaping it to mere wells from their ancestral homelands. That story fits. Appalachia is thick with Scots-Irish echoes, everything from fiddles to folklore. Wells were part of their world, practical and symbolic, often linked to blessings or curses, depending on who told the story. But another camp insists it's older, that this well traces back to Cherokee Springs, once considered sacred. Springs weren't just water, they were places of renewal, places where hunters cleansed themselves before entering the woods, or where healers gathered to pray. The idea that settlers stumbled onto such a site, repurposed it for their own needs, then layered their legends on top that carries its own heavy plausibility. Historians still argue whether this well is settler-built, native-adapted, or some hybrid of both. The truth may be buried in the stones themselves, but without written records, the debate loops endlessly, like a dulcimer string plucked in circles. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the 1960s, a local amateur historian swore he found carvings on the inner stones that resembled Cherokee syllabary. Trouble was, nobody could get down far enough safely to confirm. And by the time a team tried in the 80s, the supposed markings had eroded smooth. Was it just imagination, or did the well once carry a hidden script? You'll never know, but the possibility keeps the air charged. You lean closer, eyeing the careful stack of mossy blocks. Whoever built this, it wasn't careless work. Each stone slots into the next like puzzle pieces. No mortar needed, just gravity and trust. You can't help joking to yourself, forget IKEA. I want Appalachian Stonework Starter Kit. Still, the craftsmanship holds you quiet, pulling you into the weight of its making. The forest hushes for a moment, cicadas pausing mid-chorus as though even they want to hear the stones explain themselves. But the well keeps its secrets, same as always, leaving you perched on the rim, wondering how many different voices have argued this exact question under the same stars. The night deepens, and you hear it. A long, low call drifting through the trees. The owl's voice cuts clean, haunting and steady, like a reminder that the forest is not yours to own. It belongs to creatures who've lived here longer than your family line. And tonight, you're only a guest. The sound shivers down your spine, then repeats, closer this time. You glance toward the ridge, eyes straining in the dark, but the owl is invisible, just a presence stitched into the silence. In Appalachian folklore, owls often carried heavier meaning. Some said their calls were warnings of death. Others believed they were guardians watching over travelers at night. Which version you believe probably depends on whether you are naturally an optimist or someone who Googles their symptoms at 2 a.m. Historians point out that owls were common figures in Cherokee stories, often linked to wisdom or the spirit world. Settlers layered on their own superstitions, blending European fears of owls as ill omens. The result? A bird whose hoot could either terrify you or reassure you. depending on the story you've last heard. Scholars still argue whether Appalachian owl lore leaned more protective or foreboding. But standing here, the truth feels slippery maybe. It's both. And then there's the quirky bit. Some old mountain folks swore that if an owl called 3 times in a row while you were near a well, your wish was guaranteed to come true. Problem was, they never said what happened if the owl called a 4th time. You catch yourself counting under your breath 1, 2, and then silence. You exhale, oddly relieved. The well doesn't react, but the chain sways gently, as if stirred by unseen wings. You make a joke to yourself. Cool, I'm being supervised by night security with feathers, and it almost calms the tightness in your chest. Almost. The owl calls again. Further off now, and the force settles back into its buzzing rhythm. But the reminder lingers. You're not alone. You never were. The clearing feels quieter now, as if even the owl has signed off for the night, leaving you and the well alone. You lean over the rim again, bucket still resting against the stone lip, and peer down. The water has gone still, flat as glass, reflecting the moon with eerie perfection. For a moment, it looks less like a well and more like a mirror planted in the earth. You shift, and your reflection shifts with you, distorted at the edges. It's not just your face, you sits other shapes too, flickers that don't quite belong, a shadow of someone in a hat. A child with braids. Maybe it's just your tired brain playing connect the dots with ripples. Still, the image feels heavier than coincidence. Historians write about how wells across Appalachia often acted like community mirrors. Quite literally. Before households had polished glass, people checked their reflections in still water. A bucketful could reveal not just your face, but, in superstition, your fate. Young women especially were said to stare into the water on certain nights, hoping to glimpse the face of their future husbands. Scholars still argue whether those stories were simply romantic dares or genuine belief in water as a doorway to what's ahead. And then there's the quirky tidbit. Some locals claimed the well didn't show your reflection at all if you were too close to death. They'd sneak up behind their elders, push them forward for a peek, then whisper nervously when the water showed only the moon. A cruel game, but one that stuck in the folklore. You dip your fingers into the surface, and the mirror shatters into silver ripples. The cold bites again, deeper than before, as though the water doesn't want to be disturbed. You laugh quietly. Sorry, guess I didn't read the mirror's terms and conditions, but your voice comes back softer, like it traveled farther down than you expected. You stare again, trying to catch the image reforming. Your own eyes stare back, but behind them, something shifts too, fleeting to name. You blink hard, but the water has gone still again. Perfect and calm. The forest hums. The well waits. And you relapsed with the uneasy sense that you've looked into something not meant for you. You stand a little straighter, palms cooling on the moss, as if the stone itself is finally done with your circling and wants you to speak. The water below has settled into that calm, mirror-flat patience. Again, a dark coin punched into the earth. You fish in your pocket and find a cheap, scuffed coin. Nothing dramatic, just a survivor of vending machines and laundry days. Good. Grand gestures age poorly up here. The mountains prefer quiet things, done honestly. You turn the coin until it catches moonlight. Hold it at the height of your breath. Feel ridiculous for half a second, talking to a hole in the ground, till the absurdity softens. The way a joke at a funeral lets people breathe. Okay, you say, not loud, not whispering, just enough to reach the water. Here it is. The wish you build isn't for rich as coal towns already warned you about price tags with teeth. So it isn't for glory either. The Civil War shadows proved how thin that fabric is. You want something smaller and sharper. Steadiness. It's a path that doesn't give way under your boots. Good water when you need it. Good people when you don't know you do. The kind of luck that nudges a lost traveler toward a porch light. You angle the coin over the mouth and pause, sifting through the old rules people muttered. Don't say the wish out loud. Don't look down after you throw. 3 breaths in, 1 breath out. Counterclockwise for love, clockwise for everything else. Quirky and inconsistent, like a recipe card rewritten by 5 ants. One fringe rule surfaces from the folklore stew. Write the wish backward on birch bark to confuse trickster spirits, or turn your pockets inside out so luck falls in. You do neither. You hold the coin, let the breath settle, and trust clear words more than clever tricks. No Latin, no chalk marks, no midnight contract, just you, the water, and old stones that have heard worse bargaining. Historians still argue whether Appalachian customs are stitched from European well blessings or grown here from older spring practices, then glossed with frontier thrift. Your pulse doesn't care. The need hums through your fingertips into the coin. You let it go. It drops in a clean line, catches a thread of moonlight, and vanishes. A heartbeat later, the softest plink, then a gentler echo, and then the hush that says the well is thinking about it. You keep your eyes on the wobbly cloud reflection and murmur. Customer service will be in touch within 3 to 5 business entries. The joke lands like a pebble tiny, but it breaks the tension. You don't look down, old rule, play along. Instead, you watch the tree line, and, in your head, the bottle trees you imagined earlier clink their glass throats. A frog clears its voice. Your shoulders drop. You picture the answer coming as small rearrangements. A shortcut you notice tomorrow. A stubborn knot in your thoughts, loosening on its own. No fireworks, it's just the forest nudging a sapling toward light. A steadying fact floats up. Great Smoky Mountains National Park was established in 1934. And the Civilian Conservation Corps soon laid miles of trail and shored up springs and wells across these ridges. People have tended water here with calloused hands and government shovels for nearly a century. Your wish is standing in a place where care is normal, not miraculous, and that comforts you. You lean your elbows on the rim. The stone's chill sinks into your skin. The bucket gives a small metallic sway, as if it remembers. You think of the tokens you found, the ribbon, the locket, the featureless coin ant. Make a private rule. Your offering is your own. You won't borrow what the well has learned to keep. You tap the stone twice, the way someone might knock wood, and let the gesture be the thank you. Drowsiness paddles in. Thoughts braid, ballads rising from the stones, miners, lanterns, potato cures. An egg bobbing in a jar of shine, bottle trees catching little winds. It quilts together, mismatched and warm. You smirk at the image of a lifestyle influencer pitching cottagecore well rituals. Then promise the mountain you won't invent a hashtag for it. Small mercy. The air slides cooler. You listen for the oming crowd as favorite metric 3 owl calls equals guaranteed wish, but the ridge stays quiet. It's fine, you tell the clearing. I'm not grading this. The chain answers with the faintest rattle, like a cat flicking its tail. Noted. You add the last ingredient the old stories forgot to standardize. A trade. If the wish takes, you'll carry a little more gentleness down the ridge. Keep water in your car for strangers at broken shoulders. Tip buskers who sing the old songs off key. Plant 1 blue bottle tree and let it ring. Fair is fair. The impulse to peek finally gnaws through your discipline, so you glance only at the surface, not the bottom. The mirror holds. Your face ripples and reforms. The moon stares back with patient indifference. For a moment, you catch the blur of that locket's portrait hovering beside your cheek. You choose deliberately to call it a trick of light. Not every kindness asks permission to haunt you. You push away from the stone and settle into the grass. Careful of damp patches and of the ants, you imagine negotiating property rights under your knees. If an ant sues for trespass, you decide to settle out of court with a sunflower seed. You chuckle. the night accepts the offering. The silence grows softer at the edges. There is no trumpet, no sudden wind, just the slow percussion of droplets somewhere far below, like a metronome teaching you how to wait. You fold your arms around your shins and lean back until stars ride the lip of your vision. Whatever happens to the coin happens in darkness you don't control. Your part is finished. Your breath evens out, and the well satisfied holds its tongue. You don't move right away. You let the night do what it does best, finish its sentence. The moon slides low behind the ridge like a coin easing into a pocket, and the clearing changes temperature by degrees you feel more than measure. Frost doesn't come, but that same fine edge of cool gathers at your wrists and neck. You breathe it in and realize the course has shifted. Cicadas smooth down their static. Crickets thin the beat. A single, brave bird tries out a note like someone clearing their throat before a speech. The owl has clocked out. Night shift over. You touch the rim one last time. Palm meeting the cold stone has been the constant in this whole wandering hour. The bucket is still damp, a tiny drip counting seconds into the dark. Your wish sits wherever wishes go filed, shelved, or circling like a moth ant. You accept that you won't get a receipt. It's very on brand for this place. Service excellent, paperwork non-existent. A light mist unrolls from the hollow, a pale scarf dragging low across the grass. It mutes the world. Trees turn to silhouettes. The meadow becomes a watercolor wash. The well looks older in fog, as if the centuries stack more visibly when the air gets soft. A braver bird tries 2 notes. You smile. Alarm clocks are for people without whip-poor wills and robins. It's also for people who don't trust birds to hit snooze. A sensible thought pads in. There's a trail to find, and wet grass loves to ambush socks. But your body votes to linger, and you let it win. The tokens, you spotted the ribbon, the locket, the featureless coin rest where you left them on the rim. For half a second, you consider tucking the ribbon safer between stones, then decide against it. The well curates its own museum, doesn't need a night intern. You drink in a steady fact to anchor the moment. The Appalachian Trail, a ribbon of footpath stitched together by volunteers, is declared complete in 1937, stretching more than 2,000 miles along this mountain spine. People still hike it to find steadiness, the same thing you asked for a minute ago. Different ritual, similar hunger. Somewhere not far from here, a white blaze on bark is taking first light like a lit match. You like that? You keep it. Its fog beats the moss in little glass pearls. It makes you think of bottle trees again, the way colored glass once sang in wind by cabin doors. You imagine, wildly but not unhappily, the morning dew chiming tiny notes along those bottles as the first sun threads in. There's a folk tidbit for the dawn crowd. It's 2 old mountain families swore that washing your face in May morning dew kept your skin clear and your luck kinder. Not a clinical study, just a ritual with better side effects than most diet fads. You rub dew from the moss across your knuckles, because why not? Worst case scenario, you get moisturized by Appalachia. Something taps in the tree's woodpecker, probably, or fate doing percussion with a beak. You laugh under your breath. It's not loud, just a warm leak of air that fog can catch and keep. Good morning, you tell the well, and the chain answers with a light, almost polite tick. If this place were a person, it would be the kind who leaves fresh water on a porch for strangers and dozen tea brag about it. You give the clearing a slow, careful inventory so your brain can file it for later. The oval of stones. The fringe of grass mashed where you sat. Beetle, re-shouldering a crumb of bark like it has rent due. The locket's hinge, still stubborn. The ribbons, pink bleached to almost sunrise. The coin that time erased, now a tiny moon of metal. You'll remember these even if you forget their exact coordinates. Your memory loves anchors with texture. Historians still argue whether dawn visits to wells whispered wishes, Cain offerings, token offerings of old world well-dressing customs, or romantic inventions layered on by later collectors of folklore. The debate dozen tea changed the way the air tastes when the first light folds over the ridge and slides into the hollow like honey. Some your lungs vote for the practice on sensory grounds alone. You stand, joints making tiny opinions known, and brush grass from your knees. The meadow holds out a few extra spiderwebs because morning decor is complimentary. You step around the silver lattice like a polite guest at a fragile gallery opening. Another bird joins the chorus, then another. A cardinal shoots across the path and removes any remaining need for an energy drink. It's nature's push notification. Day is live. You let yourself have 3 jokes before you go, like sprinkles on the last donut. First, that the well is basically the original app drop data in, wait for push results. No dark mode required. Second, that do is free skincare with a suspicious lack of influencer affiliate links. Third, that the Appalachian Trail is cardio you didn't exactly order, but the universe upgraded you anyway. The clearing permits these with the tolerant silence of a host who's heard every story and still sets another plate. When you finally step back from the rim, you don't say goodbye out loud. You just smooth the moss where your sleeve disturbed it and press 2 fingertips to the stone. The gesture is enough. The dawn well keeps looking like itself, older than your worry, steadier than your plans, uninterested in applause. The path out finds you rather than the other way around. That's how it works here. Edges soften until the wave becomes the only thing left in focus. You ease along the margin of the meadow, letting seed heads stripe your cuffs. And then the trees collect you, each trunk a gray pillar, fading upward into canopy light. The night soundtrack dissolves into morning bird song. And the old ballad you thought you heard earlier gets remixed by robins and wrens. You hum to bars without meaning to. It fits. Before the band swallows the clearing, you allow yourself a last glance back. The well is smaller from here, just a clean puncture in the field, a period where the forest decided a sentence needed to rest. Sun reaches the rim and sets the damp stones glowing. For a blink, you think the locket's dull oval catches a brighter spark. Coincidence? You tell yourself, and you let it be. Your boots find the trail's firmer gravel. The ridge breathes. The wish doesn't answer. It doesn't need to. You feel the answer as an attitude instead of an event. A loosened knot. A slightly less stubborn day waiting down the mountain. The oldest range in North America, older than the Rockies, worn gentler than any new-built peak shrugs you toward morning with the patient kindness of something that has seen every version of hope. You go where it points. Let the edges soften now. Let the trees loosen their silhouettes and turn from lines into pale smudges. Kind, the way fog is kind. You don't have to hold the clearing anymore. Clearing holds you, then lets you go. The well is a smaller circle, each step you take, and then it is only an idea. A cool place in the mind where water rests and listens without hurrying you. Walk as slowly as you like. There is no race in this light. Each breath carries cedar and damp earth and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. Steps land quietly, souls learning the measure of the path, and the forest adjusts its breathing to meet yours halfway. The birds keep their bright conversation above, but even their notes round off at the edges, as if the day understands that you are not quite awake yet and chooses a gentle volume. You could look back, but you don't need to. What matters follows, a steadier cadence settling into joints and thoughts, a small pool of calm you can cup with both hands whenever you want. It is portable. That's the best news. Carry it down the slope, the way people once carried pails, and not a drop spills. Let the picture thin to simple shapes. Trunks become vertical strokes. The path is a soft line. Your wish, spoken or not, goes quiet and smooth, like a stone that has finished rolling and decided to be a stone again. No verdict, no deadline, only the easy sense that direction is available when you want it. If you need a last sound, take the hush, the well-taught, youth, slow. Even rhythm of droplets finding water and set it behind the fan's breath, behind the room's kind darkness. Let it be the metronome for rest. Close your eyes. The mountain will keep watch. The day can wait at the edge of the trees.